So generally, if you want to get your permanent residence in Japan, you're going to have to be living in the country for at least 10 years before you can even apply. And it's the same in many other countries, I know. But what if I told you that I was able to get my permanent residence in only 3 years? And even more than that, what if I told you that I can show you how you could get your permanent residence in a fraction of that time? Maybe even as little as 1 year. If that's something that interests you, then stick around until later in the video so that I can show you how that can happen. Now, if you're someone who's interested in coming to live in Japan, or maybe you're already here but are interested in staying for the long term, then you might already know that Japanese people, by law, are not allowed to have multiple nationalities. This means that if you are interested in getting your Japanese nationality, you're required by law to renounce to any other nationalities you might have. And if you're someone like me who was not exactly willing to part with the nationalities that I have, then your next best alternative to stay in Japan for the long term would be to get your permanent residence. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the only choice, because theoretically you could just keep your 1-year visa and renew it endlessly whenever necessary for the rest of your life. But this is a video that many of you have been asking for, and still, if you're planning to stay in Japan for the long term, then I think the best choice would be to go for the permit that allows you to stay here as long as you want without ever having to renew it ever again for the rest of your life. For those of you who are coming for the first time, my name is Gabriel. I'm a business owner living in Tokyo, Japan for 5 or 6 years now, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, I was able to get my permanent Japanese residence in only 3 years. So my purpose today is to share with you the process in the most direct and simple way to show you that you can do it too. However, as I know that there are many other people who've had different experiences and they will also have many different opinions, my intentions for this video are not to tell you what you should do, only to tell you what I did. If you find it useful, great. If it applies to your situation, even better. But please don't take it as a set of instructions, because that's not what this is going to be. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, yes, it's true, you do have to be living here in Japan for at least 10 years before you can apply for your permanent residence. And that means that until then, you'll have to renew your 1-year or 3-year or 5-year visa as many times as necessary until you can finally apply. I've made another video where I talk about that process in detail, so if that's something that interests you, I'll leave the link down below in the description or in the pinned comment or somewhere down there. But the truth is that, as you would imagine, the process to get your permanent residence can be a little bit more complicated and meticulous than for the shorter term visas. Especially if you're planning to do it in 3 years or in 1 year, as I mentioned earlier. Don't worry, I'm going to get to that very soon. But one thing that I would like you to keep in mind is that this is such a detailed and delicate process that I would strongly suggest being aware that you do not need to go through the whole process alone. And I'll tell you in just a moment exactly what I mean. First, let me tell you about the process I had to go through to get to where I am. Now, as you may or may not know, my wife and I moved to Japan from Switzerland about 5 or 6 years ago. And in fact, we had gotten married shortly before coming here. And as you could imagine, I was here for my first couple of years with a spouse visa because my wife is Japanese. And that spouse visa is only valid for 1 year, depending on your particular circumstances. What that means is that right before it expires, you're going to receive a little postcard from the Immigration Bureau telling you to get all your documents in order and head down to the offices to make an appointment and renew your permit once again. And that is just a process that I absolutely hated, because you can say whatever you want about Japanese efficiency, but that's a process that can absolutely kill your entire day. And I dislike bureaucratic stuff in general. But anyway, that's the process and that's what I had to go through. And I'm sure that there are many other foreigners who are currently still doing the same thing. So you could say that I'm making this video for them too, to help them get out of this endless cycle. In any case, looking for ways to get out of that and keeping in mind that I came here to Japan to create my own business, so that meant that I needed to have a more solid legal status in the country. We started looking around for other alternatives that I might have. And rightfully, we found out that according to immigration law, if you're married to a Japanese citizen, you can apply for permanent residence after 3 years. So if I remember correctly, right after our 3rd year anniversary, we decided to start the application process. And remember a few moments ago when I told you that this process is so difficult that you should be aware that you don't need to do it alone. Well, this is what I was talking about. Even though up until that point we had done mostly everything by ourselves, with the exception of the very first spouse visa application, in this case we also decided to enlist the help of a lawyer. And if you ask me for my honest opinion, I really think this is the right way to move forward. Because not only is the lawyer very fluent in the language and the jargon necessary to present your case, he also understands the process and the requirements very well. And he can also serve as a very valuable guarantee for the government on your behalf that you are a person worthy of consideration to receive a permanent Japanese residence. Now, of course, this service is not free, and you can expect that it will cost upwards of $1,000, depending on your specific circumstances. I'll talk about those in a second too. But as I've said before, life will only ever accept two types of currency from you, time or money, and there's a right time for each of them. And in this case, we've decided to go with the money, simply to ensure and to have the security that the process would be done in the right way. Now, I can already hear many of you saying, but Gabriel, from the beginning of the video, you've been talking about being able to do all this in only 1 year. So tell us, what are you talking about? Now, before I can tell you how you can dramatically shorten the time to get your permanent Japanese residence, we need to talk exactly about what you need. These are the requirements. Now, as you can see, this is a very detailed list of requirements, but I'm going to go over a few of the most important ones now, and in any case, I'll leave the link to the website in the description down below so that you can have a more detailed look later. First of all, of course, you know you have to do things like filling in the right application form, having your pictures taken, bringing copies of your ID documents and passports and so on. But there is another very important document that you also have to get, and that's your Koseki Tohon, also known as your family registry. And as far as I know, that's a document that's mainly used here in Japan. Now, if you're a Japanese citizen, that document is going to serve as your most immediate family tree, which involves basically your parents and your closest relatives and the people that live in your household. And you, as the applicant, need to get this document because when you marry a Japanese citizen, you also enter that family tree. So you have to go to the town office and get your spouse's family registry. Now, keep in mind that this document, as well as many other documents, have a very strict expiration date. So make sure to get them and submit them as quickly as you can. Other than that, of course, you're going to need a whole array of financial documents, such as your bank statements, your tax returns, both yours and your spouse's, of the past 3 years, regardless of whether these are taxes paid in Japan or in your home country, as well as proof of health insurance and many other things. This is all basically for you to prove to the government that you are financially solvent and that you can withstand the weight of your financial responsibilities. And so in that regard, you also have to be able to prove that you're making at least a minimum yearly salary, which here in Japan is about $35,000 a year. But on top of that, if you have any kids, then you have to add to that around $7,000 per child per year. So that's also something important to keep in mind. And that's it. In theory, if you have all these documents in order, you should be ready to apply. But we're not done yet, because there's another list of documents that you should also take into consideration. And that list is right here. Now, this is an additional list of documents that you can submit voluntarily to help your case. And these are things like letters explaining your reasons for moving to Japan, any deeds that you might have if you own any land or properties, any investments you might have, any investment accounts you might have, any letters of recommendation you might have, any photos of you as a couple, as well as any photos of your assets, your lands, your properties, and so on. And this is where the help of the lawyer is going to come in very handy, because he's the one who's going to compile all of these documents and present them in the right way. And you have to keep in mind that presenting things in the right way here in Japan is a very important thing. So once again, I think enlisting the help of a lawyer is a very, very valuable thing to do, and it's going to take more than a few headaches off your shoulders. Now, I personally think that all these things and all these documents can greatly help your case. So you should try to get as many of them ready as you can so that you can build a solid case in your favor. But now it's time for the very small detail that we've all been waiting for. How can I do all this in my first year in Japan? And well, as it turns out, the law states that you do need to be married to a Japanese citizen for at least 3 years before you can apply. But that does not mean that you need to be married in Japan for those 3 years. In fact, in theory, according to Japanese immigration law, if you've been married to a Japanese citizen for a number of years, preferably higher than 3 of course, then you only need to be living in Japan for 1 year before you can apply for your permanent Japanese residence. You heard that right. That means that you don't have to wait for 10 years like everybody else. You don't even have to wait 3 years like me. You can become a full-time Japanese citizen for the rest of your life in as little as 1 year, granted that you cover all the necessary requirements. So if this applies to your situation, then I hope you found it useful. And if you would like to know how I really feel about living in Japan after all these years, then make sure you watch this video right here. In the meantime, take care, and I'll see you next time.